The topic is estimating the impact of Ethiopian protected areas on rural households' livelihood. My name is Tafesse. So before directly going into the research problem, into the research objective, I would like to introduce about my country, Ethiopia. It is located in the Horn of Africa, as you can see from the map. We are the second most populous in Africa. So even if we are the most populous one in Africa, second most populous in Africa, still we are one of the poorest countries in the world, with having a very small per capita income, and the poverty ratio is still relatively high, and most population is living in rural areas where still we are dependent on subsistence agriculture, where basically it relies on a natural resource. Having said this, biodiversity in Ethiopia is not only important for the country itself, but it is also important globally because we have a high level of endemic species, and there are species of conservation concern, including 29 endangered species. So, as you can see from this graph, so this one, those of threatened species, and this one, the endemic species. So these are important, and most of them are found in protected areas. So our protected areas include or constitute 16.4% of the total land area. When we see the conservation regulations and policy, unlike other African countries, the conservation policy is not mainly influenced by the West, during the colonial era, because Ethiopia was occupied only for a brief period of time by Italians, so it is the oldest independent nation. So all policies are related to the domestic ones. So when we see the first policy, for the first regulation, which restricts all forms of land use, local resource use, but recently the government revised the policy. Instead, it is trying to use the resource for conservation as well as for local livelihood and for economic development in general. So there are structural changes, and in 2008, the Ethiopian Wildlife Conservation Authority, under the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, was established, and under the new law, people can be permitted for resource use. But still, there are challenges. One of the challenges is the inadequate funding, which affects also the management, and that also affects the enforcement of conservation policy. When we see the funding that Ethiopia is budgeting for its wildlife conservation compared to other African countries and the global average, it is very small. And the other problem is still the conservation policies are mainly inclined to that of the benefits related to the global or the national, at the national level. And the socioeconomic issue, as I mentioned in my first slide, mainly we have high population and the natural resource, people are dependent on natural resource, and there is limited revenue which is generated from biodiversity conservation, and that even the benefit from ecotourism is highly centralized to the government. So it is only, local people are not getting what they need. So as a result, there is competition for resource, and one of the issue is grazing. In Ethiopia, Ethiopia is having the largest livestock population in Africa. So most grazing areas are located in protected areas or nearby protected areas. So we have that problem, and that leads to environmental problems. So the government is struggling in order to link conservation policy to that of local development. And as I mentioned before, the policy is just directing towards that, and they need, it is at its infancy, so there is a need for information on the link between protected areas and local community, because the government is acknowledging that the protected area should be part of or should contribute to human well-being, especially to local development for the people to target, to address all those issues. So the objective of this research is to estimate the impact of protected areas on the livelihood of local people. So in order to address this research objective, we have to use a method that can really suit in order to have the empirical evidence which can contribute to the policy. So one of the methods that nowadays, is used in environmental conservation is the propensity score matching. This is a tool which is mimicking the case like in randomized experiment, where it contributes to the design in a way that it finds or tries to find a comparable groups, so that there will be groups in order to compare the outcomes. So because this is important, because protected areas are not situated randomly, instead they are situated in rural areas where there is high level of poverty. So in order to for this, we think propensity score matching is important. So because it avoids selection bias, because protected areas are sitting non-randomly, and comparing just those who live inside and outside doesn't, it may lead some biasness. And there are methods which compare the control or the control and treated groups inside or outside, using some simple comparison method or regression adjustment, and that may not avoid the problem of selection bias. So for this reason, we use the propensity score matching. So what does it do? It is a measure in order to see the causal effect relationship. That means what would be the effect of the conservation policy. So it's really because we don't have the historical data and we don't have the before and after data. So we have to find a counterfactual in order to compare our outcomes. So for that, propensity score matching relies on covariates or variables or characteristics. During the design, we don't need to know about the outcome. Instead, the covariates are important. So because we control for those covariates to avoid the difference or the systematic difference between comparable groups. So that will leave, the output will leave the change in livelihood or socioeconomic outcome, in our case, livelihood outcome, that the effect has to come from protected areas themselves, but not because of other factors. So we try to manage, we control those factors which affect both establishment of protected areas and the livelihood outcome. So in the propensity score matching, just briefly, what it does is the propensity scores, I think when I say PS, propensity scores, the propensity scores are estimated using the legitimate model, which means that it is trying to estimate the probability of being assigned to a treatment group, or maybe being inside the park. And we have those scores, and after getting those scores, we try to match the control and the treated groups. In our case, we use, of course, there are different matching estimators. In our case, we use radius matching, which has a predefined distance of 0.2 of the standard deviation of the the overall propensity score values. So when we come to the method section, as I said before, we have 41 protected areas, including 11 strict national parks, which are managed by Ethiopian Wildlife Conservation Authority. And these are selected in order to ensure that they are representative, at least in the agroecology. So we have the Awash National Park, which is located in the lowland, and we have the Abjata Shala National Park, which is in the midland, and we have the Bali Mountains National Park, which includes the Afro-Alpine ecosystem in the highland. So we have these samples of protected areas, and for the design, we try to use a stratified random sampling in order to have a quasi-experimental design, so that we have representatives from inside the park, adjacent the park, and outside the park. So in our case, the unit of analysis is going to be, they are going to be householders. So when we say the difference between inside and adjacent is just, adjacent means those who are living just nearby the park, sharing border with the park. So if householders are living in an administrative unit adjacent to the park, it means that they are more likely to share or to have impact or to use the resource inside the park. So basically, the Kabbales or the smallest administrative units, that have a land overlapped with the protected area range from 6 to 90. So the least one has. So it means that 6% of the land is at least within the protected area. So outside, we said outside because these are very far from the, relatively far from the park, and they don't have any overlap. So we consider the inside and adjacent as treated, or in the paper we call them park Kabbales, but the control ones are a bit further, and we split this into two, from 6 to 15 kilometers and beyond 15 kilometers. Actually, our intention was to take householders which are far from this distance, but due to the situation at that time, at the time of data collection, given the parks are remote, and going remote area at that time was not safe because of some political instability, so we decided to have this distance at least, which is reasonable. So in total, we have 665 households. We use record survey in order to get livelihood incomes, outcome from all income sources during the year 2015. And we also use GIS in order to generate some data like vegetation cover, and elevation and distance to the main road, distance to the cities, distance. But for our model or for our analysis, we used these characteristics or variables. Biophysical data, the socio-demographic, including age, education of household, and the family characteristic, the household characteristics, and economic ones, the assets and livelihood diversity, and the farmland holding. So these are the ones which are used. So when I come to the descriptive summary of the results, just focusing on the first one, just this is the difference between the inside, the treated, and the control groups in terms of income. For our model, we used the log income, not the level one. When we see the total household income, when we decompose by livelihood activities, we have householders living inside the park, adjacent the park, and outside the park. So we see clear differences in livelihood activities between control and inside ones, even adjacent ones. So this one is for inside one, for the control one, where their share, the total household income share largely is coming from crop. In the case of inside one and adjacent ones, the crop income has more, the contribution is relatively small, but the natural resource use is dominating, mainly the fuel wood, charcoal and firewood collection. So we have other non-timber forest products. This includes honey, forest honey collection, coffee, and the like. So this is just their characteristic. So after matching, we have got 345 treated households and 272 controls. Among the 393 households from the treated, 50 of them are dropped. So this is a propensity score, the blue line for the treated ones and the red broken line for the control ones. So we took this in order to compare the total household income. So for the result, finally the result, after the matching, we have different estimators here. Our primary estimator is the matching one, radius matching. We have 19% increase in total household income if householders live, for householders who are living inside and adjacent to the park, or for park cabales, the total household income increases by this much percent. In the case of NAVE, or comparison of means, where we don't consider covariates, or if we don't control for observable characteristics, this value is higher, which is about 25%. It means that there is overestimation if we don't use, or if we don't control the covariates or the characteristics. If we use regression adjustment, just regression on the raw data, we will have this result, and other matching, which is also a kernel matching that I didn't talk. So overall, we see a positive effect, and the magnitude is not significantly, it's not different. All of them are significant at 5%. But we see something which is the simple comparison seems to be overestimating. So we think that the result is robust in a sense that every estimator is telling us positive effect, and which is nearly the same. So in order to see the spillover effect, the effect between householders living just near the adjacent householders or near the adjacent cabales, and those farther from the adjacent cabales, if there is any spillover effect, we compared, and we find no statistical difference in the treatment effect. Instead, when we see the NAVE estimator is telling us that there is negative effect being located far from the park. But we are much more interested in the average treatment effect on the treated, which has policy relevance in our case. So it means that there is no spillover effect, at least for this sample. So finally, this result suggests that there is no indications that protected areas negatively affect the livelihood of local people, but there is an opportunity for them to have more income instead. We don't know whether it is sustainable or not, but it's mainly coming from natural resource use. So the other thing is just simple comparison may overestimate the effect, so it is good to have a technique to use for controlling this overestimation. So at the moment, even if the parks are strictly protected for conservation purpose because of the issues that I mentioned in the background, they are it is a de facto open access for local people. So mostly the income is coming from the natural resource use. So there should be a policies that targets those group of people who really depend on income and they don't have any other means to support their livelihood. So for that, the non-timber forest product, at least the current policy which allows sustainable use to some extent, regulated use would seem to be much, reconciling the balance between conservation and that of development. Actually, it has to be in agreement with the local people. So this is my presentation. Thank you for coming. And I would like to thank you for the University of Western Australia for providing me every support during the fieldwork, during my stay here, and the seed for supporting this field project and my entire PhD and the conference, and I really appreciate that. And my team, while we were working on the field, we were having so many ups and downs, so I really appreciate the farmers who contributed, who participated in the survey. So, thank you very much.